I'm Mar, and this is my opinion. Over the last decade, shared universes have garnered mainstream cinematic success. While comic book sequels are nothing new, crossover films were elusive. TV was the only place you'd see Spider-Man team up with Wolverine.
That all changed with the debut of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A gamble for Marvel, it paid off many times over, and is now one of the most successful film franchises ever. Not to be outdone, DC Comics and Warner Bros. Decided to follow suit, debuting their own cinematic universe with 2013's Man of Steel. A standalone reboot of the successful Superman franchise, it retold the origin while updating the character by placing Kal in a modern, post-9/11 world. A world in which Kal struggles to find his place. While this creative choice was polarizing with fans, the film was a financial success. With one hit on their hands, Warner Bros. Moved forward with their universe. This is where things began to jump the rail. Whereas Marvel started slow with standalone films for each character before crossing over, DC jumped straight into team mode with 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Taking place 2 years after Man of Steel and building off its foundation, the film expanded DC's universe, but sacrificed cinematic integrity. Like its predecessor, the film's color was dingy and editing was weird, an aspect Warner didn't aid by cutting the film by 30 minutes for its theatrical run. Lengthy in either cut, Snyder and the other producers crammed too much story into a single film, taking elements from The Dark Knight Returns, The Death of Superman, and other arcs to craft their story. The first two alone would be enough material for a film's plot, but together in one act they bogged the film down. I'm fine with ignoring the 3-act cycle, but this film ignores acts entirely. While I enjoyed both cuts, more so the extended version since the editing isn't as jarring and the added elements flesh characters out, the flaws hurt. I disagree with some of Henry's acting choices. The Batman Nightmare sequence could have been deleted without hurting the overall film, as its placement screams extended cut more than what Warner execs ended up cutting, and Lex's casting. From a writing standpoint, I see what Snyder intended. His Lex is a twisted individual whose dark worldview was crafted by years of paternal abuse, and he hides this dark side with outward, awkward eccentricities. This is a case of writing hindered by casting. While Eisenberg pulls off the awkward eccentric, he fails at expressing darkness. While one can argue that awkwardness is intentional, it doesn't integrate well, standing out among the film's other elements. The awkward bathroom scene I have no issue with, as it comes off as genuinely romantic, in a campy way. Flaws aside, there were elements that were savored and was universally liked, although there were murmurs about the Caped Crusader branding criminals and seemingly ignoring his no-killing policy. Both aspects are tied together and are a result of Snyder taking inspiration from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. In that what-if comic, Batman has come out of a decade-long retirement, bitter and hardened by his time away, and how the world has changed since he hung up the cowl. These elements shine through with Affleck, but the context is changed, with Ben's Batman embittered by the damage Superman and Zod caused and the danger the Man of Steel's presence brings. His paranoia helped along by Lex's subtle prodding. This leads to the long-awaited live-action fight between the world's finest. While the context shift means it doesn't have the same impact as in Miller's comic, where it was longtime friends fighting a battle they now had no choice but to wage, it serves a different purpose, as the fight was brought about by Lex's manipulations. The killing aspect isn't a major thing either, as Batman is killed off and on in the comics throughout his run, turning it more into a guideline than actual rule. It's at the writer's discretion. The voice modulator doesn't bother me. While not praised as heavily, many fans enjoyed Gal Gadot's portrayal of Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman. I thought she did fine for what her role was. While her line delivery could have been better at points, her body language at times balances things out. Nothing award-winning, but a decent introduction. Now we come to the elephant in the room. Doomsday. While I have no issue with Warner using this character in his debuting storyline, here it feels tacked on. Plot-wise it makes sense, as it's Lex's backup plan, a comic change I don't have an issue with, but it bogs the film's ending down, making an already long film feel even longer. His first form is hideous, resembling Brundlefly. His battle mutations correct this issue. The CGI is destitute, quality varying from shot to shot. The change to Doomsday's origin doesn't bother me, although I can understand if some fans despise it, especially when placed aside the running time. As he's made from Zod's remains, film Doomsday has the same kryptonite weakness. This change necessitated an alteration to Kal's demise while retaining his sacrifice. Instead of an, "Oh my god, Superman's dead!" response, the film goes with the, "Oh, he sacrificed himself for us" route, building off xenophobia introduced earlier and continuing the Christ allegory. Batman v Superman polarized fans further than its predecessor, not surprising considering the above. One would think DC and Warner would learn from their mistakes, but with Suicide Squad we learned that wasn't the case yet. Taking place directly after BVS, the plot involves government official Amanda Waller putting together a team the government can deploy during an emergency in the wake of Superman's death. The team consists of high-profile criminals such as Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, Harley Quinn, and other Rogues Gallery members. Each member is expendable, making each a perfect choice for Waller. The film is more straightforward than its predecessor, with odd editing occurring only when Waller is introducing the profiles to military officers, an element that is both a positive and a negative: song usage. While it is not unusual for movies to use popular songs to set mood and tone, Suicide Squad goes overboard, cramming in over a dozen tracks. The Warner producers might deny it, but any viewer with a brain can see this as a response to Guardians of the Galaxy. It was an adaptation based on a lesser-known comic, was a hit, and used songs. While DC followed that format, they failed to see why it worked for Guardians. In the Marvel film, all the songs had meaning to Peter Quill, as they were on a tape his mother left him before she died, and after his abduction, it is his last personal memento of Earth. With Suicide Squad, songs are placed randomly. Sometimes they work, such as with Deadshot and Harley's introductions, the city entry, and ending, but most of the time, they feel forced and questionable. Fortunate Son's use over Croc's introduction is the best example. Of all the Creedence Clearwater Revival songs, why the Vietnam one? The marketing department's biggest sin involved the Joker. The trailers made it seem the Clown Prince of Crime had a larger role, perhaps even as the main antagonist, but in the end Leto is a glorified cameo, and Enchantress is our villain. While a decent choice given her backstory, Joker easily would have been the better choice. Would have given Harley a conflict to overcome, perhaps even the catalyst for the Queen to turn her back on her puddin'. While polarizing, I didn't mind Leto's turn as the Joker. As a more modern gangster vibe than previous live-action incarnations, while the tattoos aren't needed, I don't mind them, and the grill could be the result of a previous encounter with Batman. While his voice is ledger light, it is distinct enough to not be an impression. His Joker laugh sounds feeble, which is sad considering Leto is a singer and knows how to project his voice. But considering the main scene, where it's a focal point, includes a helicopter, I don't hold it against the actor. Could just be the sound mixing that's at fault. The rest of the actors I felt did an excellent job, with no major complaints in that department. The costuming and makeup were excellent, with the film earning an Oscar, although that win did earn its fair share of criticism.
And one thing I didn't notice the first time, and I noticed even more with my recent rewatch, is that the way the entire Suicide Squad fights, it seems like a LARP group. They all have their own gimmick, they all have their own special weapon, they easily defeat all the minions, and they have trouble with the main villain, like a LARP group would with a boss. And of course, someone perms. If you don't know what that means, it means you permanently die. All that we're missing is a white mage. And you know what they say, nobody fucks with the white mage.
With two polarizing films under its belt, Warner was under pressure from critics and fans alike. For the most part, both were pleased with this year's release. Wonder Woman, the first theatrical release to feature the character as the main protagonist. Although I enjoyed the previous two entries, I went into this film with medium expectations, mainly because I feared Warner would mess with the film before release like they had before. While nothing groundbreaking and not the best comic book film ever made, Wonder Woman was enjoyable. Gal's still not winning any awards, but her performance felt more natural, and she added a charm to certain scenes. The supporting cast did well too, and it was nice to see normal color while on Themyscira. The ending twist is not for everyone, but it worked for me. It made the general scenes make much more sense, as Danny played the character as a traditional villain. As a result, Ares becomes a manipulator, working his war game from the shadows, which makes sense given his backstory. To some it might come off as Loki light, but unlike everyone's favorite Nordic trickster, Ares is, to use a wrestling term, one and done. He came in, put over the babyface, and left. One could argue that a different actor could have been used for his godly scenes, but I felt he did okay. Not as good or memorable as his performance in Dragonheart, but adequate. It also gives added context to Diana's line from Batman v Superman regarding beings from other worlds. You don't get much otherworldly than a god.
Still, the film is not without its flaws, with the sore thumb that sticks out being the constant overuse of slow motion during the battle scenes, especially the scene in the warehouse. Oh boy. While it was nice to actually see the action unfold, it got old very quickly.
While the best of the three recent films, I still place in second overall behind Man of Steel. While this spin isn't everyone's cup of tea, and admittedly I prefer Donner's, I enjoyed Snyder's take on Superman's origin. While confusing in places, the editing allows the narrative to unfold differently, helping the film forge its own identity. Since the film's release, everyone has argued constantly about the deaths of Clark's father and Zod, along with the offhand, maybe comment. For the latter, it makes sense in context, especially if one places him or herself in Kent's place. If your son had superpowers and had used them to save one of his classmates, and in the process risked exposing his secret, how would you react? Costner's vocal inflections even betray he's not saying it in a serious manner, he just has no idea what else to say at that moment. Speaking of Costner's Kent, his death is definitely a love it or hate it moment, and I understand why some hate it with a burning passion. I lean more towards the love it camp, although that word is too strong to accurately describe my feelings. In Donner's film, Clark's father dies of a heart attack, and in the process, he learns that even with all his powers, some things are beyond his control. A message that runs counter to the film's ending, but one thing at a time. Here, Clark's father dies in a tornado. He has the opportunity to save him, his father waves him off, he does nothing, and he dies. Clark learns that if he hesitates and doesn't act, he'll regret the decision later. Clark doesn't act, and his father dies. This lesson trickles into Zod's death. The general has lost everything and will not stop until either he or Cal are dead. He acted. It's also not the first time he's killed Zod either.
And I want to know if I'm alone in this, but am I the only one who's interpreting Clark's freakouts during his flashbacks when he's in school as an allegory for autism?
With Justice League set to be released, I'm hoping that Warner, Snyder, and others behind the scenes have learned from their missteps. I want the film to succeed, just as I want the series to grow to compete with the MCU. However, if the film contains the same flaws and goes from polarizing to despised, I dread what follows. My hope is strong, but it can only stand against so much.